Hello, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well today. Just want to take this time to welcome you to our channel here at the Potter's House. Streatham, my name is Gabriel, and today I'm going to be continuing in our series on a biblical worldview. As mentioned before, a worldview is the lens through which you look at life, through which you look at the world around you. And as Christians, we are called to think biblically on all things. And today I want to look at a very interesting subject. And I want to look at the issue of food, having a biblical worldview on food, the food that we eat. And we want to look at our main text to begin with for this series, which is Romans 12, verse 1 to 2. Romans 12, 1 to 2 says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And our text for today, when it comes to the issue of food, it comes from Romans 14, verse 1 to 4. So the Bible says, receive one who is weak in the faith, but not to dispute over doubtful things. For one believes he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats only vegetables. Let not him who eats despise him who does not eat, and let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. For who are you to judge another servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand. A biblical worldview on food. I want to examine a faulty standard to begin with. Now, a lot can be said when it comes to the issue of the food that we eat. Now, we know, of course, that there are all different types of food, all different kinds of food that we can eat. You have meat, you have poultry, you have vegetables, you have dairy products, etc., etc. You get the gist. And there can also be concerns about how much of certain foods that we take in, especially because now we're in what we call the microwave generation, where a lot of food is processed and we have things that are added in, such as colorings, preservatives, and all these weird and wonderful things. So no doubt you'll be given advice in regards to your diet, in regards to how to eat well. And when you look at the Bible, there are actually principles in regards to diet that show that God cared for the children of Israel after they came out of Egypt. So in Leviticus chapter 11, verse 1 to 3, it says, Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, speak to the children of Israel, saying, these are the animals which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. Among the animals, whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves and chewing the cud, that you may eat. And there are some people who follow these principles in regards to diet. They look at the dietary food laws which God gave to the children of Israel, and they see it as good advice. They follow it, and they, based on this and maybe some other resources that they look at, they decide what is good for them to eat and what is not good for them to eat. So I guess the question today is it a good thing for you to watch what you eat? Yes, indeed. I would say that is good advice. There is great wisdom in that. The problem, however, is that this can be taken to an extreme. This whole idea of food and our diets of food that we eat. And what are some ways in which this can be taken to an extreme. One of the issues at hand is that there are some diets that simply lack common sense and wisdom. I want to read 1 Samuel 14:24. It says, "And the men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul had placed the people under an oath, saying, 'Cursed is the man who eats any food until evening, before I take vengeance on my enemies.' So none of the people tasted food." So imagine this. Saul is fighting against the Philistines, and he's calling for a fast. He's calling for a fast, telling people not to eat during a battle, during the war. And quite frankly, it lacked common sense and wisdom. It's not an appropriate time to call a fast in the middle of a war. It lacks common sense and reason. You need all the energy that you can get in a war. There are diets that simply lack common sense and reasoning. And sometimes these diets are based on bad advice or based on misinformation. I remember reading a story of a lady by the name of Zana Samsonova, and the story was a very tragic story. It spoke about how she had a raw vegan diet for 10 years, that she only ate fruit and vegetables. She would speak about it a lot on her social media feeds, how she only ate fruit and vegetables and apparently drank no water for 6 years. And the sad thing was that it was a diet based on misinformation, and she sadly passed away. She died at the age of 39. Now, again, there's nothing wrong in of itself of eating fruit and vegetables, but the diet was so restrictive. It just lacked common sense and reasoning, and it was so sad that it cost this dear young lady her life. And another way in which our diets, the food that we eat, another way in which these things can be taken to an extreme is that what we eat has become a religion in and of itself. There are people who follow a particular diet and seek to impose it upon everybody. They make you feel guilty as if you sinned if you eat animals, for example, or eat the produce of an animal. They promote people who follow their lifestyle, and they demonize people who don't. I remember reading an article online from the BBC. This is maybe about 2-3 years ago, about the issue of veganism. And if you're vegan, this is it's not to cast shade on people who are vegans, but there was actually a report about how there are some people who take veganism to an extreme, and that it is literally tearing families apart. There were family members that were falling out because one person is a vegan and the rest of the family or another person is not a vegan, and the vegan is constantly telling people, "Oh, you shouldn't be eating the animals. Oh, look what you're doing," and the family members just couldn't take it. It was just a bit too much. And the problem at hand was that the person who became a vegan, it became their whole life. In other words, what you eat or what you don't eat becomes a standard of righteousness. It makes you appear more spiritual or more moral if you do or don't eat certain foods. 1 Timothy 4, verse 1-3, this speaks of the last days. It says, "Now the Spirit expressly says that in latter times some will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, speaking lies in hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron, forbidding to marry, and commanding to abstain from food which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth." So our food and our diets can be taken to an extreme if we're not careful. I want to examine, secondly, imposing a standard. Now, when it comes to the food that we eat, the Bible does make room for people to have a particular preference. Having a particular preference in regards to what you eat is not in of itself a bad thing. Romans 14 verse 2, it says, for one believes he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats only vegetables. Now, what would be some reasons as to why some people may have a particular preference when it comes to what they eat? For some people, they eat certain foods for health reasons. They've actually been advised by their doctor, by their dietitian. They haven't been advised by some kooky website. They've actually been advised by their doctor, by their dietitian, to refrain from certain foods and to stick to a particular diet for health reasons, to build up their health. Leviticus 11 verse 2, it says, speak to the children of Israel, saying, these are the animals which you may eat among all the animals that are on the earth. God was attending to the health of the children of Israel not long after they had come out of Egypt. They were slaves in Egypt, more than likely had a very poor diet. They were no doubt treated very poorly, very harshly by the Israelites. So God was attending to their health. Many Orthodox Jews to this day follow this kind of diet, which is laid out in the book of Leviticus. 1 Timothy 5:23 is another example of health being taken into consideration. 1 Timothy 5:23 says, no longer drink only water, but use a little wine for your stomach's sake and your frequent infirmities. So this is Paul speaking to Timothy. Timothy had many stomach issues, and he was drinking water, but it's not like today where the water is better sanitized. So what Paul says was to mix a little bit of wine in the water to help with your stomach issues. So this was, again, for health reasons, not for recreational reasons. This was wine mixed with water, which would have neutralized the alcohol. And nowadays we have grape juice and many other alternatives which help the stomach. So alcohol, in many respects, is just not needed. In our text, we see that some refrain from foods because of a weak conscience. Romans 14 verse 1-2, it says, receive one who is weak in the faith, but not to dispute over doubtful things. For one believes he may eat all things, but he who is weak eats only vegetables. The Bible mentions a lot about meat offered to idols. Now, the biblical revelation we have is that idols are not real. Idols have no real power. But while they have no real power, there were people who got saved out of a lifestyle of idolatry. They came out of a lifestyle of making sacrifices to idols. And as a result, they would have had a more tender or a weak conscience, because in their mind, the idol is still real or has some kind of power. In our day and age today, we have videos of animals being slaughtered, being treated poorly, people who are often accused of being cruel to animals. Now there's a big push on products which say this has not been tested on animals. And some people, they have a weak conscience in regards to this issue. Or you may have people who have come from another religion who were taught growing up not to eat certain foods. For example, we know in Islam that eating pork, eating any product from the pig is forbidden in Islam. We know in Hinduism that the cow or beef is forbidden. So when people come out of that lifestyle, they may still feel as though, I maybe shouldn't eat these foods. They may still have a certain way because they have a weak or a tender conscience. Now, the Bible does make room for this, that you can be a Christian and choose not to eat certain foods. The problem, however, is when it is imposed as a standard of righteousness. when you measure yours or someone else's morality or spirituality based on the food that they eat. This is something which the Bible condemns. Now, as Christians, why is it problematic to take convictions about foods to an extreme? One of the issues at hand for us as Christians is that it distracts from the gospel. It's a distraction from the gospel. So Acts chapter 10, verse 9 to 15, and then verse 28, it says, the next day as they went on their journey and drew near the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. Then he became very hungry and wanted to eat. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance and saw heaven open and an object like a great sheep bound at 4 corners descending to him and let down to the earth. In it were all kinds of 4-footed animals of the earth, wild beasts, creeping things, and birds of the air. And a voice came to him, rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, not so, Lord, for I've never eaten anything common or unclean. And a voice spoke to him again the second time, what God has cleansed, you must not call common. Now, verse 28, then Peter said to them, or he said to them, you know how unlawful it is for a Jewish man to keep company or to go to one of another nation. But God has shown me that I should not call any man common or unclean. So Jews and Gentiles, generally speaking, didn't mix together. And even not long after the church was birthed, this was the case. We know when the church first started, it was primarily Jewish. And the idea was that they weren't sure as to whether or not Gentiles were a part of the new covenant. Peter had never eaten foods which were considered unclean for him to eat as a Jew. However, God used his vision to make it clear that it wasn't just non-Jewish food that was his issue, it was non-Jewish people. That God wanted to use Peter to reach out to a Gentile named Cornelius, but his Jewish diet, which is not in of itself a bad thing, became a stumbling block to reaching people who were not Jewish. Our call is to reach people of all kinds with the gospel. Our primary calling is to evangelism and discipleship, the building up of the church, the building up of the body of Christ. But the problem is that if we look down on people who think differently from us when it comes to food, then it can be a stumbling block. Romans 14, verse 3, it says, let not him who eats despise him who does not eat, and let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. So it distracts from the gospel. And another thing that can happen is that it causes division. Romans 14:1, again, it says, receive one who is weak in the faith, but not to dispute over doubtful things. Not to dispute over doubtful things. When we make our diets the be all and end all, when we try to impose our standards on other people, it can cause division, especially for us as Christians. People begin to dispute over things they ought not to be disputing about, especially when the Bible makes it clear that it's not what we eat that determines if we're righteous or not. What we eat does not make us righteous or unrighteous before God. Mark 7, verse 17 to 23, it says, when he had entered a house away from the crowd, his disciples asked him concerning this parable. So he said to them, are you thus without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatever enters a man comes from outside? Whatever enters a man from outside cannot defile him, because it does not enter his heart, but his stomach, and is eliminated, thus purifying all foods. And he said, what comes out of a man, that is what defiles a man. For from within, out of the heart of man, precedes evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these things come from within and defile a man. So the issue here, the religious people, they're getting onto Jesus' case because his disciples they're plucking corn or with unwashed hands, and they're basically having a go at Jesus because they're eating with unwashed hands. But Jesus said it's not what goes into you that defiles you, it's actually what comes out of you, because it comes from your heart. So what you eat does not determine whether you're righteous or not before God. Another thing that can happen when we as Christians take our diets or what we eat to an extreme is that it can actually destroy Christians. It can destroy other Christians. Romans 14, verse 15 and verse 20, it says, yet if your brother is grieved because of your food, you are no longer walking in love. Do not destroy with your food the one for whom Christ died. Verse 20, do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food. All things indeed are pure, but it is evil for the man who eats with offense. And 1 Corinthians 8, verse 10 to 12, it says, for if anyone sees you who have knowledge eating in an idol's temple, will not the conscience of him who is weak be emboldened to eat those things offered to idols? And because of your knowledge, shall your weak brother perish for whom Christ died? God takes it very, very seriously when we cause or bring about stumbling blocks for weak Christians, because it can lead them back to a sinful life. For example, if someone was to see you eating in an idol's temple, though an idol has no real power, they may feel encouraged to do the same, to eat the food offered to idols. And in their mind, because the idol has power, they may feel tempted to go back to the former life of idolatry. If someone is made to feel as though there is no hope because they eat things that you consider to be bad or wrong, they may feel there is no point in serving Christ. See, Jesus takes it very seriously when a little one is made to stumble into sin. And I want to look finally with you at made to stand by Christ. So the Bible is very clear that we are not saved by our dietary preferences. What are we saved by? We are saved by our faith in Jesus Christ. Romans 14, verse 3, it says, let not him who eats despise him who does not eat, and let not him who does not eat judge him who eats, for God has received him. Because we are saved by our faith in Christ, we ought not to look down on Christians who have a particular preference or who have a particular conviction about the food they eat. Because the most important thing is that they have been received by God. Like with Peter, God wants to make clear to us that he does not show partiality based on a person's nationality or diet. The gospel is available to all. Acts 10, 34 to 36. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, in truth, I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him. The word which God sent to the children of Israel, preaching peace through Jesus Christ, he is Lord of all. So if the gospel is for all, how should we respond to people who think differently when it comes to culture or diet? We still ought to minister to them. We ought to minister the gospel to them. The gospel is our priority, not the food that we eat, as important as that is. And in all things, we are called to think biblically and not to think like the world. Romans 12, verse 1 to 2 says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. You see, if the gospel is for all, then all who place their faith in Jesus are not only made right with God, they are able to stand by God. They are made able to stand by God. Romans 14, verse 4, it says, who are you to judge another servant? To his own master he stands or falls. Indeed, he will be made to stand, for God is able to make him stand. In time, people may begin to think differently about the food they eat and not have a weak conscience, or maybe they may not. But ultimately, it's their faith in Jesus that's the most important. And if God has received people with a weak conscience, then how should we treat them? We should treat them with love. We should look for ways to build them up in their faith and not to tear them down. Romans 14, verse 19, it says, therefore, let us pursue the things which make for peace and the things by which we may edify another. And finally, Romans 15, verse 1 to 3 says, we then who are strong ought to bear with the scruples of the weak and not to please ourselves. Let each of us please his neighbor for his good, leading to edification. For even Christ did not please himself, but as it is written, the reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me. A biblical worldview on food. I just wanted to take the time to thank you all for listening, for tuning in today. Again, just want to encourage you to like, comment, share, subscribe, support. You know the drill by now. And if you feel God to move upon you to be a blessing to us and support us financially, we would greatly appreciate that. The details are up on the screen and will also be in the description for our channel. So I encourage you to partner with us and support us, whether on a one-off basis or on a regular basis. But apart from that, I just want to wish you all a great rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you, and God bless you.